Well, given these political facts that you're describing, in addition to the facts on the ground, is a two-state solution, is a viable Palestinian state possible?
Sure. There's one thing that's required, that the United States drop its rejectionist stance. For over 30 years, the United States has been blocking such a settlement, and Canada and Europe sort of go along. But although they theoretically approve the two-state settlement, if the U.S. would change its stance, and there is no sign of that, unfortunately, Israel would go along by necessity. There would be no need to force the settlers out of the West Bank, no civil war, nothing else. They simply announce that on such and such a day, the Israeli army returns to Israel, at which point the 90% of the settlers will happily get into the trucks provided for them and move from their subsidized homes in the West Bank to subsidized homes in Israel. And if there's a group of nationalist religious extremists, most of them from Brooklyn, who want to stay, okay, they can stay under Palestinian authority. No violence, nothing. There can be a legitimate land swap, not the kind that Lieberman is talking about, not the kind that the New York Times approves, but a legitimate one. And in fact, such a solution was almost achieved not very long ago. There's been 1 week in the last 30 years when the U.S. Dropped its rejectionist stance, namely in Taba, Egypt, in the last month of Clinton's term, January 2001, when Israeli and Palestinian negotiators came very close to a settlement. In fact, they said in their last press conference that with a little more time they could have reached it. But Prime Minister Barak of Israel prematurely called off the negotiations, and that disappeared, and nothing's been pursued since. It's important to stress that Obama has made it very clear that he opposes a two-state settlement. There's a lot of illusions about Obama, but just look at what he says. He's a thoughtful, careful person. I'm sure he selects his words carefully. His first foreign policy declaration happened to be on Israel-Palestine. It was the announcement of George Mitchell's appointment as mediator. And he stressed, as always, that our prime concern is the security of Israel. But he said there are some constructive steps, proposals on the Arab side. And he mentioned the Arab League peace proposal, so-called Saudi plan. And he said he thought that had constructive elements, and he urged the Arabs to follow up on the proposal there for normalization of relations with Israel. Now, he carefully excluded, consciously, surely, the core of the plan, namely a two-state settlement in accord with the international consensus. That's the precondition for normalizing relations. Well, when Obama omitted that and called just for normalization of relations, he's saying loud and clear that the United States is going to, under his administration, is going to continue to block the possibility of a diplomatic settlement. And every other action taken so far conforms to that. But that's not graven in stone. That can change.
But there are many Palestinians. I mean, I spoke to Dr. Iyad El-Sarraj during the bombing in Gaza, and he's not a supporter of the two-state solution. He had some interesting comments where he basically suggested that the psychology of the Israeli state is such that a two-state solution is not feasible. And also, you yourself suggest that there's not much motion in the United States towards any change in policy. So,
well, all my life, I've opposed a two-state settlement. I think there ought to be a single binational state. But there's a difference between proposal and advocacy. I mean, we can propose that everyone should live in peace. Okay, nice. It becomes advocacy when you describe a means to get from here to there. Now, in the case of a binational state, there was a time when it was directly feasible, 1967 to 1975. And at that time, I wrote and spoke about it quite a lot, a book and many articles. But it was just greeted with hysteria on all sides. The PLO didn't want it. Israel didn't want it. The Jewish community hated it. Everyone hated it. But it was feasible then. Today, it isn't. The only form of advocacy that I know of for a binational state, what's sometimes called a one-state solution, is in stages. The first of which would be a two-state settlement, which is within reach. And Al-Sarraj is quite correct that it's very far from ideal. But it would reduce maybe end the cycle of violence. It would create conditions under which the two people could, let's hope, find ways to integrate more closely and move to a preferred solution. If there's another way, I haven't heard it. Everything else I've heard is just vacuous proposals like "let's all live in peace."
Well, one last question, if I may, with regards to the extraordinary influence of Israel upon the United States and the media bias. What suggestions would you have for trying to create a more balanced picture within the U.S. or Canadian media?
There's only one method, and it's familiar, and that's education, organization, and activism. And it works. It's slow, but it works. Let's take the analogy of South Africa, which people bring up all the time, and take an actual careful look at it. There was an effective boycott, sanctions movement, divestment movement against South Africa in the 1980s. Okay, now in more civilized countries like India, it began in 1946. So as soon as independence was declared, Nehru declared a boycott of South Africa. But in the West, which is much under, much deeper imperial racist principles, it was hard. The first very limited boycott was in the 1960s. It was an academic boycott on a very narrow issue, namely racism in the universities. But it wasn't until many years of education and organization had taken place that the public had turned around. So by, say, 1980, there was no support for apartheid. Congress was beginning to pass legislation. Corporations were opposed to apartheid. And at that point, you could carry out the understanding of the issue had changed, not by magic, by education and activism. And it was possible to carry out a successful movement. And there's no reason why that can't happen here. So take the United States. About two-thirds of the population is in favor of the Arab peace plan. But in the United States, policy is sharply divorced from opinion. And there's a way to deal with that, namely to organize public opinion so that it's not just here's what I think, but I'm going to do something about it. That's happened on issue after issue, and there's no reason why it can't happen here. Same in Canada. It's not going to happen by magic, but if people dedicate themselves to it, of course it can be done.
Well, thank you very much for your comments. I can see that I've already exceeded my time, but very appreciative, and I hope that if at some point in the future I can call you again and perhaps we can have another discussion.
Sure, like to.
Thank you very much.
Yep, bye.
Thank you.